Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says honey, the sweetener on your plate may be sugar syrup. There was a study that was conducted by the Center for Science and Environment. This happens to be one of the not-for-profit and advocacy organization. This study was based on a test that was conducted in a German laboratory. This laboratory has given the result which goes on to say some of the top honey branch of India like Daba, Patanjali, Baidyanath and Zandu were not able to test the purity of honey. In this particular backdrop, our focus with respect to this issue falls on the issue of adulteration and contamination of the honey. So what is this article all about? We will be discussing about the adulteration of the honey and its impact on the health and what needs to be done going forward. First up, we have to know the definition of honey. We have the Food and the Agricultural Organization. This has given a definition which has been universally accepted by majority of the countries. So what is this honey? Basically, it is the natural sweet substance produced by the honeybees from the nectar of plants or from the secretions of the living parts of the plants or excretions of plague sucking insects on the living parts of the plants that bees collect, transform by combining with specific substances of their own, deposit, dehydrate, store and live in the honeycomb to ripen and mature. This is the standard definition that which has been accepted by number of health organizations world over. Now, if honey is adulterated with sugar, that is not honey, says this Food and Agricultural Organization. So the whole crux of this article is that there has been an adulteration. Why? Because they have added sugar into this particular honey, and as a result what we have had is the adulteration of honey. We have one of the tests that was conducted by this German laboratory. What was that test? It is called as the nuclear magnetic resonance. So what is this test all about? Basically, when you look into this NMR technology, this was developed by a German company. Why? In order to identify, check the origin and adulteration in honey. So what will it do? It will identify whether the honey is purest or not on the basis of molecular methodology. So it is able to identify the origin of the honey and if this honey, that which is being consumed by the people, is it authenticate or not? Is it natural or there have been addition of sugar or any other adulterants in this particular honey? So what is this technique all about? This is one of the gold standards to identify whether the honey is natural or adulterated. But kindly remember, this NMR technology is not mandated when it comes to the Indian laws. In case there is the honey, if it does not pass this particular technique, it is still allowed when it comes to India. But when it is being exported, if that is the condition for the export, it has to meet the criteria of NMR. So what is important here? When it comes to India, it need not have to meet the parameters and the technology of the nuclear magnetic resonance. But if it is being exported to another country, it has to make sure that it clarifies and is classified as pure when it comes to this technique. When the Indian honey branch were subjected to this nuclear magnetic resonance at a lab in Germany, only 3 bands were able to pass. Which are those? One, it includes Saffola, Marquette Sohana and Nature's Nectar. But rest of the major companies was not able to meet up to the standards of this technique. Now the important question is, how are these companies adulterating the honey? When you look at the Indian companies which were into the honey business, they were importing synthetic sugar syrups from China. These syrups were added into the honey and they were adulterated, and ultimately it gave the taste and that of the sugar syrup when it comes to the honey. What is the importance of honey? When you look at honey, bees usually consume it. They also digest it and regurgitate the nectar, and this happens to be beneficial for all of us. It is not only directly taking it from the plant, but it is also contributing its own amino acids and the phytochemicals, which is also giving what is called as the antioxidant, antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. Honey is also scientifically proven to be good for our immune system, improve our well-being, and it is also good for the health of the gut as well. These are some of the reasons as to why honey is important for the human beings. But if honey is adulterated, then what we will have is not the pure honey, not the natural honey, but the adulterated honey. So the adulterated honey means that we are digesting what is called as the sugar syrup, and when there is more sugar in that honey, what we will have is increasing cases of obesity. People will also become obese as well, and they might have threatening infections as well. The adulteration of honey has also destroyed the lives of the beekeepers as well. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, you have two honeybee bottles. One is costing you about 50 rupees, the other is costing you about 100 rupees. Both of them look similar. Which of the products which you would be buying? It will be obviously 50 rupees. But what is happening with this 50 rupees bottle is that there is adulteration. Why? Because these are the huge companies. The huge companies also have money at their disposal. So they buy the sugar syrup, they add it into this particular honey, and they are able to send it to the people for procuring. But that is not happening with respect to the beehives. They put their lives at threat and they get what is natural one, and when this happens, it is mostly costly as well. But we do not care about the costly or the softer one, but what we go about is whether it is cheaper. So in this particular case, what the industries have also done, apart from impacting the health, they are also destroying the lives of the natural beekeepers as well. So what is the way forward? What should be done in the near future to prevent adulteration of the honey? When it comes to honey, what we have to do is three-pronged approach. One is with reference to the government, the second is with respect to the industries, and the third is with respect to the consumer. When you look at the government, it has to come up with laws. It has to make sure that there are legislations that are passed which the industries will have to comply by. So the government in the first issue will have to tighten the standards and make sure all these testing requirements are provided in that particular society through the coming up with the laws as well. So what we require is the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, which also has to make sure that the nuclear magnetic resonance, which is followed in other countries, is also implemented in India. As of now, this is not the requirement in India, but the FSSAI should make sure that it is implementing such a technique also in India. So the first important factor is the government coming up with standards and making sure that all these standards are maintained, sustained and followed by the industrial body. So the industrial body will also have to be responsible as well. Because people are buying it, they have to be responsible enough not to adulterate it with sugar syrups. And the most important of all is whenever there is a test that is conducted, these test results will also have to be put publicly as well. Why? Only when it is put out in public, people would know which are the companies which are giving us the genuine products, which are the companies which are sending out their adulterated products. So the companies will be able to be punished by the consumers. So what's happening here? We will have the consumer who will know who is giving us the genuine products, but the rest of the industries and companies will be punished by the customers themselves. So what we require is that particular organization which usually conducts the inspection, they have to visit a particular market, take up this particular sample, conduct a particular test as per the methodologies prescribed by the government, and ultimately throw out the results in front of the consumers, so the consumers know what is the result test all about, and they punish that particular company and that industry. And finally, what we also require is the traceability and transparency. What is this traceability and transparency? Let's say, for example, we have a huge logistics chain. Let's say it is sourced from a particular forest, or let's say there is a person who is going to catch this particular honeybees. So what we have is the traceability from where it starts and where it ends. This entire system and its data will have to be tabulated as well. So the government in the near future will have to make sure that whenever there is a honey producer, his source, the person who is getting it, all the data will have to be collected. So the traceability with respect to all the stakeholders, including the consumer, each entity in the supply chain, the collector, the trader, the packer and seller, all these records will have to be maintained by the government is what we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about the collection of the caste-wise data. What is the context? We have the Tamil Nadu government which has established a commission to collect the caste-wise data in the state of Tamil Nadu. In this particular backdrop, we will try and understand what is the importance of collecting the cost-wise data. We will try and understand what are the concerns with respect to it, the challenges with respect to its implementation, and what needs to be done going forward, both by the state government as well as by the central government with respect to the collection of caste-wise data. When you look at the caste census in India, the caste census in India was not taken up after 1931. The last time that we had the caste-wise data, that which was collected was in the year 1931. Also note, this is an exception to the SCs as well as the ST community. With respect to the other communities, the caste-wise data is not being collected or is not collected after 1931. But we have one of the census that is called as the socio-economic caste census, that which was taken up in the year 2011. What was this socio-economic caste census? As the very name denotes, it is a caste census on the basis of social status of that particular caste in the society. It is about the economic condition of that particular caste and its people in the society, and on the basis of which the government can come to a conclusion about the deprivation and the backwardness of this caste in India. So basically, this particular census was conducted across the length and breadth of India, across all states and also union territories as well. But this data that was collected in socio-economic caste and census of 2011 was not given out by the government of India. Why was it? That is because of lack of reliability of the data that was collected, because of the political nature, and also because of electoral sensitivity. Because of all these reasons, this data was not given out in the general forum. Now, our important factor is why caste-based census is very important when it comes to the Indian polity. As we have referred number of times and we have discussed about it, we have what is called as the affirmative action. What is this affirmative action or the reservation? There has been historical injustice that which is perpetuated, committed on certain castes in India. So what exactly happens? These castes were not able to perform historically because they were not given equal opportunities to make sure that justice is provided to these people. What we have is the segregation of the caste. Why? Because historically they were also segregated on the basis of caste. It is said that the upper caste in India were dominating on the lower caste, and because there were these lower castes who were not given opportunity, what we required is the affirmative action in the present society. So what is this affirmative action? The affirmative action is in the form of reservation. Let's say, for example, the SCSTs, the OBCs also have reservation. So this reservation is based on the statistics that which was currently taken up historically. So we do not have the updation of it except for the SCST community. So now what we require is the updation and the validation. So the updation and the validation for making sure that affirmative action is provided to all these sections of the society, we need what is called as the caste census, because you can always not go with the historical data. We require the current data to make sure and understand which are the castes which have developed over the period of time. These castes can be removed in the near future, but if there are castes which are not improved and in fact they have depreciated in the social society, that is when these castes will also have to be given more reservations, is the need of the hour. So in order to understand which castes have developed, which castes have downgraded themselves, what we require is the statistics. So this statistics can be taken up only with respect to the census data. We also have to remember that in the past we have seen a massive amount of economic growth in the past 1 century. There have been some jatis or what is called as the castes which are able to pull themselves up. They were able to come out of the poverty. They are able to come out of the marginalization as well. But there are others who have also sunk in it as well. This has to be reflected in the current situation and the current paradigm. So what we require once again is the caste census. The Supreme Court of India, in number of landmark judgments, has also asked the state governments as well. Let's take the example of Maharashtra, or let's take the example of Tamil Nadu, where it has given reservation for about 69%. So when you have given this reservation for about 69% of the people in your state. This has to be provided with quantifiable data. So the state government will have to provide the Supreme Court the data and statistics. So what they require is the caste based census. So that happens to be some of the advantages of the caste based census. So what will happen right now? So all those who have improved over a period of time, they will be removed from the reservation, and in case there are people who have not developed over a period of time, and these people will be added into the caste based reservation, or what is called as the affirmative action. So that becomes the importance of the caste based data. But we have to focus more on the concerns as well. What are these concerns? When you look at the caste based mobilization, what it can pull up is the auto mobilization for all the political parties. What happens? People are segregated, they are divided in the form of caste, and ultimately who will reap the benefits of it? It is the political class. Let's go back to the year 1871. We have the colonial census that was conducted back then. They also started dividing people on the basis of caste. On one side, they were supporting the upper caste, saying that they were the ones who were holding the treasures of the Indian society. But on the other side, they wanted to have a split as well. They wanted to divide the society as well. And in the near future, it is these upper caste who are pitted against the lower caste. So what we see is historical injustice in the Indian society meted out by the British rule for their own advantages. So the same can also be used by the political parties to take the mileage to win the elections only on the basis of caste. So one of the major disadvantages or the concerns with respect to the caste based census is these political parties can take it, engineer it, divide and rule over the people in India. Then we also have to look for the fact that whenever we go to the doctor, what we actually see is the merit of the doctor. When you want to go and build a particular bridge or the construction of your house, what you look for is an engineer who's come from a reputed college. But when we look at the politics in India, why are we still stuck with the caste and the religious based identity? What should ideally be spoken is about the employment. What should ideally be spoken about the infrastructure development? What should ideally be spoken about the employment opportunities? But instead of all this being spoken, what we have is the political parties misusing their political mandate in the name of caste, in the name of religion, and that happens to be the unfortunate incident even in 21st century in India. While there are countries which are growing on the prospects of science, we are fighting amongst each other in the name of caste and religion. So this can be used by the political parties for their own skills, for their own growing, is what we have to understand. So going forward, our whole intention should be about not identifying the caste or the religion, but vote for a political party which takes the mandate of giving us education, giving us universal healthcare, giving us employment opportunities. It is these issues that have to be taken up. So going forward, our intellectual thinking should be about sowing the seeds of parity, equality, and magnanimity. And only when we are able to sow these seeds in the near future, our children, our grandchildren will bear the fruits of equanimity in the society. If we are able to not do so, we will have the political parties which will take advantage of this, break us, and divide and rule in this particular 21st century. That is not right, is what we have to understand. But there are pros as well, there are cons as well. But when you look at the pros, if there are political parties, if there are genuine intellectual people, because there has been grave historical injustice that which is being perpetuated, this data will have to be used for the social and economic justice. We have to make sure, yes, there is reservation, but this is for uplifting of the people, but not for divide and ruling of the people. If this is done, if it is used for social validation, for the economic validation, it is a good one. But if it is about divide and rule, that is not the same. So what we have to look at is that when there is a prospect of data collection, the political party's mandate is to make sure that social justice is provided to the people, economic justice is provided to the people, and such is only on the basis of caste census, which happens to be one of the advantages of the caste census. But when it comes to its execution, there are challenges as well. What are these challenges? Let's say, for example, within a caste, there might be hundreds of subcastes as well. Within a particular religion, there are many castes as well. So, how are we going to take up everything when it comes to the caste based census? In fact, within the subcaste, when there is a person who goes about asking the questionnaire, there might be spelling mistakes as well. So, how do we categorize caste, subcaste, and come up with a mandate so that we would be able to give all these required affirmative actions or the reservation? And at the same time, we also have the political mobilization as well. There are number of political castes which are actually coming up, so these castes are also wanting for the reservation. So how are we going to effectively make sure that these dominant castes in certain states are also provided reservation and affirmative action? The major challenges, these are the people who have historically had enough number of lands, but due to agricultural problems they are not able to make profits, and now these castes are also requesting the government. They are fighting, they are agitating, they are going on a strike. For what? For making sure that these dominant castes in that particular state comes under the fold of what is called as the reservation. This happens to be some of the challenges when it comes to the execution. So the government of India or the government of that state will have to rationalize how it is going to use all these caste based data, is what we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about China on the basis of two important principles. One is on the external sector, which is speaking about the foreign policy. The other is on the domestic sector, which it is speaking about how China is trying to build an image within the fold of its own boundaries. First, let us take what is happening on the external sector. When it comes to the external sector, we have the diplomacy that steps in. So according to a new word named by the strategic thinkers or the diplomats, they call the external sector of diplomacy that which is carried forward by China as what is called as the China's wolf warrior diplomacy. So what is this China's wolf warrior diplomacy? This is a new approach taken by China. So what exactly happens in this case? It is not conservative anymore. It is not passive, but instead China after 2010 has become very passive when it comes to its foreign relations. So what was once a conservative passive society or the diplomacy style of China has now been changed to an assertive, proactive and high profile China. So when it comes to the wolf warrior diplomacy, these are the offensive strategies, these are the bold strategies, the assertive strategies that which is taken up by the Chinese diplomats to make sure that they are able to defend China's national interest in a more confrontational way. Now the question is, why is that China is becoming more assertive, or why is that China has become more dominant when it comes to this diplomacy style? That is because of two reasons. One, when you look at the Western society, the Western society of late is being criticizing China. So what the Chinese diplomats feel is all the projections made by the Western media is completely biased. It also has an ideological tint and it also has racism involved in it. So because they feel that the Western media has not been doing justice to the Chinese style of diplomacy, they have become assertive over a period of time. Then when we go back to the year 2010, what we also have is China, whose GDP actually overtook that of Japan to become the world's second largest, because it had grown in confidence, because it has numbers right now, because its economic strength has been boosted. It is also able to bail out and also give money to other countries as well. So what are other countries doing right now? They are able to take money from China. So because they have been taking loans, they will also have to listen to China. One such example is Pakistan. Pakistan listens to China. It has become indirectly a colony of China. Why? Because it takes money from China. So as a result, what we see is China has become assertive and dominant. One is because it feels that Western media is biased, and the other reason is it has become the second most dominant economic power in 2010 after Japan. So in this particular backdrop, Europe, let us take some of the examples. We have the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chuing and Zhuang Zhejiang who have taken and hit out at number of people when it comes to COVID-19. They have been hitting back on the criticisms if it is made against China. In case there are people who have questioned that this particular virus is come from China, they have dismissed it and they have gone assertive and aggressive as well. In fact, they have also asked companies and countries to actually drop using the PPE kits that which has been sent from China as well. And apart from this, they have also been taking direct confrontations as well. Let's say for example along the line of actual control, or let's say for example in the South China Sea, they have been doing it repeatedly to dismiss all the claims with respect to the LAC or the South China Sea. Apart from this, let's say if the Western community has been showcasing about the human rights violation in the Xinjiang province. We have the Uyghur people, their rights are not taken into picture. They have been humiliated because they have a different religious practices. So what does China do? China automatically projects what it feels is right. It might not be right, but it is projecting that it is right, and it is creating a new narrative as well. It is saying that Uyghurs in China are a happy souls. They are being given re-education. Such is the narrative that China is planning to build. So this is an aspect of what is called as the wolf warrior diplomacy. And apart from this, there have been domestic changes as well. So what are these domestic changes? China is also making paradigm changes when it comes to the education. So they are reintroducing what should be studied in the form of nationalistic trend, and at the same time they are also coming up with indoctrination campaigns, promotion of leadership cult with respect to President Xi, and finally they have taken up what is called as the anti-corruption campaigns as well. All these issues have been taken up on the domestic front so that the Chinese audience do not question the leadership under the Communist Party of China. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. So basically it is about the external sector, the wolf warrior diplomacy, and also on the domestic front where they are indoctrinating people on the front of nationalism, historical context, and also on the anti-corruption campaign. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about Jadav Payang. He happens to be known as the forest man of India. This article here is important from your essay perspective. So I would kindly request you guys to go through this article. Why? Let's say if you are speaking about the environmental issue. People who have done it, people who have made sure that they can handle things of forest, people who can handle things of nature, people who can bring massive changes in the society need not necessarily be NGOs or the governments. It can also be individuals as well. One such sweet and important soul that we have in India is Jadav Payang. Jadav Payang is called as the forest man of India, and he has inspired number of other people in India as well. He happens to be an environmental activist, and he has created a forest of his own which is called as the Molai forest. What is this Molai forest? Basically, this is the nickname of Jadav Payang, and this has now been named as Molai forest. So kindly remember, this is in the state of Assam. So he has been able to create a own forest by planting the trees and making massive changes when it comes to the environment. So it took him about 30 years to turn the entire land into a particular forest, and Jadav has protected it ever since he has been planting all these trees. And at the same time, we also have to remember that he was born in the indigenous Mysing tribe of Assam. Apart from this being the scheduled tribe in the Assam region, it is also a tribe in the Arunachal Pradesh region as well. They have their language which is called as the Mysing, which is also part of the Sino-Tibetan family. Another example from the state of Karnataka is Salu Marada Timmaka, who is also called as Alada Marada Timmaka, who have been some of the Indian environmentalists who have done great things for India as well as the world. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. But I would kindly request you to kindly go through it because you can use all these as examples when it comes to your essay. Now let's look into the next article. These two articles, choppy tidings as well as questionable data, little room for exuberance, will be discussed in our economy this week. So kindly look for our economy this week lectures. Now let's look into some of the preliminary practice questions. Consider the following statements. Supreme Court has never seen a female CGI. Supreme Court has never got a distinguished jurist as a judge. Which of the above statements are correct? The answer to this is both. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given in this article. So we have the Attorney General who's currently gone on to say that India has never had a female Chief Justice of India. In case we do have the Chief Justice of India who happens to be a woman, in that case what we will have is this will improve gender sensitivity in judiciary, and all these judges would also be able to bring in empathetic value and approach when it comes to the sexual violence. And as of now, when you look at the statistics, it currently says that there are only 80 women judges out of the sanction 1113 judges in the High Courts and Supreme Court. That happens to be a really bad numbers. So what we require is more gender parity, more women given the opportunities, and what we require is more women being represented in the Supreme Court as well as the High Court as judges and the Chief Justices is what is being said under this article. Now let's look into the next article. Consider the following statements with respect to Netra. It is a software network developed by the Indian Railways. The system was developed to monitor traffic on a real-time basis. Which of the above statements is or correct? The answer to this is none. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given in this article. So what is this Netra basically? Netra is nothing but network traffic analysis. So the traffic here is not about the Indian Railways, but this traffic is the online traffic which has been developed by India's Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics, which comes under the DRDO. So kindly remember, this is not about the Indian Railways, but this has been designed by the DRDO. So basically, they will intercept and analyze the internet traffic using what is called as the predefined filters, and this data can be used by whom? One, by the Intelligence Bureau. It can also be used by External Intelligence Bureau, the RAW, and they would be able to stop any of the issues surfacing with respect to the security threats. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following are correctly matched? Remission, reducing the period of sentence without changing its character. Respite, awarding a lesser sentence in place of one originally awarded due to some special fact. Reprieve, stay on execution of a sentence for a temporary period. Which of the following are correctly matched? The answer to this is 1, 2 and 3. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Now let's look into the next practice question. The Vittal Vidwanshak, the first monthly journal to have the untouchable people as its target audience, was published by, is it Gopal Babu Walganka, Jyotiba Phule, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar? The answer to this is Gopal Babu Walganka. Now let's look into the mains practice question. Write a critical note on the adulteration of honey in India and suggest an action plan to ensure the purity of honey. Caste-based census should be aimed at rationalizing and deepening social justice policy and not be used as a political tool to appease targeted groups. Discuss. So please write all your answers on the comment section, peer review, and also come up with some constructive criticism. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.